Now this recording is to tell the story of a man named Henry Black Death Johnson. Now Henry Black Death Johnson was a member of an army regiment called the Harlem Hellfires, the 369th Infantry Regiment. The Harlem Hellfighters were the first African American regiment to fight in World War I. They specialized in trench warfare, and they were also the longest serving American unit, completing a total of 191 days in World War I, longer than any other American unit that fought in that war. To get a little bit more information on the Harlem Hellfighters, please hop over onto IG and check out my post on the Harlem Hellfighters, and that will give you some of the backstory to the tale that I'm going to tell now. Now, Henry Johnson arrived in France on New Year's Day in 1918 and joined the French in the trenches at Outpost 20 on the western edge of the Argonne Forest in France's Champagne region. On May 14th, 1918, Johnson, while on guard duty with Neelam Roberts, heard shots from German snipers. At approximately 2 a.m., they heard the snip of cutters and realized that the Germans were trying to cut their way through the barbed wire and the line perimeter put up by the French, and they began to ready themselves for attack. Johnson told Roberts to run back and alert the French troops as quickly as he could. As Johnson then began to bunker down in his trench, and to repel the Germans, he began to hurl grenades at the Germans from the French. The Germans returned fire, launching grenades of their own and peppered Johnson with rifle shots. Roberts, hearing the skirmish, headed back to the trench to support Johnson, but on his way was hit by a German grenade and severely wounded in the hip and arm, and effectively taken out of the fight. Johnson continued to throw grenades, with Roberts passing them to him until he'd completely run out, and becoming increasingly desperate, began to fire his rifle into the darkness, hoping to repel the German troops who were slowly advancing on his position in the trench. Whilst firing at the Germans, firing into the dark, doing his very best to, keep these Germans at bay, he took rifle shots in the face and the hand. Fighting for his life, Johnson fired shot after shot, loading and reloading, until he accidentally loaded an American cartridge into his French rifle, causing it to jam. Now, at this point, I'll just explain. You may wonder to yourself, why is an American using a French rifle? And the reason for this was because the white American soldiers were so racist that they actually refused to serve with the African American soldiers. And so they were forced to fight with the French. Not only were they forced to fight with the French, they wouldn't even allow them to use American equipment. And so the Harlem Hellfighters had to use French equipment. And it just seems ironic that the racism that forced them to fight with the French in the first place, the almost caused the cartridge to jam. But anyway, let's get back to the story. So the German troops, roughly about 20 of them, began jumping into the trench to kill or capture, who knows their intention, Johnson and Roberts. At this point, Johnson could have surrendered. He could have begged for mercy from the German troops, but perhaps fueled by years of oppression, racism, and abuse, Johnson instead turned and attacked and fought the fight of his life. Using his rifle as a club, he struck blow after blow after blow until the butt, otherwise known as the stock, shattered in his hands. Weaponless, Johnson was eventually floored by a blow to the back of the head by an enemy troop. Outnumbered and bleeding from numerous bullet and shrapnel wounds, Johnson could have called it quits. But when he saw the German soldiers grabbing Roberts to take him prisoner, something inside of him just snapped, and he found extra courage, strength, and determination that was not there before. Johnson leaped up, pulled out his bolo knife, and charged at the enemy one more time. I think at this point, it's important to mention a few things. Firstly, bolo knives are big, big knives.
He's got a knife.
That's not a knife. That's a knife.
Often, bolo knives are between 1 to 2 feet long. They come with a curved blade, and they're weighted along the back. So a bolo knife is a type of knife. that is capable of cleaving through bone when wielded by a skillful or strong user.
For everything from hacking a trail through the jungle to close combat, the bolo is the national pride of the Filipino. He will now take it into battle for his enslaved people and for the United Nations.
It's also important to mention at this time that Johnson, yep, Black Death Johnson, was only 5'4".
Maybe they are physically small men, these island soldiers, but armed with their inherited weapon and blazing with determination to do their utmost against the enemy they understand so well, they will be a mighty factor when we all go back under MacArthur. For they remember that no matter where MacArthur sets up his headquarters, he always gives his address as Bataan, to keep faith with those who kept it there to the end. These U.S. Filipino fighting men have only one desire. It drives them at their work, and it gives them their motto, on to Bataan.
So, back to the story again. Johnson launched himself at the Germans in the trench. He stabbed one soldier in the stomach. He stabbed another. And whilst in the process of stabbing the second soldier, he took another shot in the arm. One soldier tried to tackle him by jumping on his back, but somehow Johnson managed to twist, turn, and stab this German soldier, killing him and stabbing him through the ribs. Overwhelmed by Johnson's ferocity and the sound of French troops arriving, the Germans fled back into the night and gave up, trying to take over the trench. Johnson collapsed. He'd been shot, stabbed, beaten, and hit with grenade fire, in total taking 21 severe injuries in his epic fight for life. Johnson had single-handedly killed 4 Germans, injured roughly 20 more, and prevented them from breaking through the French line, potentially saving the entire brigade. Later, the entire French force lined up to see Johnson and Roberts receive the Croix de Guerre, forgive my pronunciation everybody, which is France's highest military honor, and became the first 2 Americans to ever receive it. In February 1919, Johnson and Roberts and approximately 3,000 now highly decorated Harlem Hellfighters returned to New York for a parade up Fifth Avenue, where thousands lined up to cheer for them, with Johnson leading the way. As they went through the crowd, they chanted out the nickname that he'd acquired due to his heroic feats, Black Death. And Johnson smiled as he led the way. Former President Theodore Roosevelt called Johnson one of the 5 bravest Americans to serve in World War I, and in 1996, President Bill Clinton posthumously awarded Henry Johnson the Purple Heart. The final award given to Henry Johnson was in 2015, when President Barack Obama awarded Johnson the Medal of Honor, America's highest military honor. Now, I decided to do this story as audio because I thought it was just absolutely amazing. I wanted to tell the tale. It was exciting. We've got bolo knives, grenades, gunfire, people getting shot. And it was something a little bit different to my written posts. If this is the first time you're coming across any of my work, please check me out on Instagram. It's Black History Buff 777. And also, if you've enjoyed this, or you've liked any of my posts, or you followed me for a while, please hop over to Patreon. I've got more goodies over there. There are worksheets going up. There are numerous posts and pictures and all sorts of other goodies. And check me out there. So thank you very much for listening. I appreciate you. Please keep studying your history, keep studying our history. It's up to us to tell our stories for us and tell them in our way. Thank you. This recording is to tell the amazing story of Yasuke, the forgotten African samurai. Now, Yasuke first appears in history in 1579 as an attendant of the Jesuit missionary Alessandro Vallegiano, who went to Japan to visit the missions that had already been set up there. Yasuke was reported to be around 24 or 25 years of age when he first arrived in Japan. Some scholars claim that he was from Mozambique, and others claim he was from Ethiopia. But either way, his arrival in Japan caused quite a stir. This was feudal Japan, and the arrival of this tall, and I'm gonna say, handsome, dark-skinned African blew people's minds. People came from miles around to visit the church which the Jesuits had constructed in Kyoto just to see Yasuke, and he became something of a celebrity. This celebrity status soon drew the attention of Oda Nobunaga, a medieval Japanese warlord who requested an audience with him. Nobunaga apparently was skeptical that Yasuke's dark skin was genuine and had him remove his shirt and rub his skin to show that it wasn't ink. He was also impressed by Yasuke's height. He's recorded to have been over 6 foot tall in an era where most Japanese men were closer to 5 foot tall. Nobunaga praised Yasuke's strength and stature, describing his might as that of 10 men, and brought him on as his feudal bodyguard. Yasuke's original name is unknown, but Nobunaga called him Yasuke, which is most likely a Japanization of his birth name or Christian name. As the two became accustomed with each other, Nobunaga grew fond of Yasuke and treated him like family, as he earned his worth on the battlefield and on patrol at Azuku Castle. In less than a year, Yasuke went from being a lowly page to joining the upper echelons of Japan's warrior class and became a samurai. Before long, Yasuke was speaking Japanese fluently and riding alongside Nobunaga in battle, an honor reserved only for people Nobunaga must have respected and trusted. As one of Nobunaga's right-hand men, Yasuke gained a handful of enviable privileges during his tenure, including his own private residence, a ceremonial katana sword, and the pleasure of dining with Nobunaga, which few samurai were privy to at the time. Unfortunately, however, Yasuke's career as a samurai would not last long. In 1582, Nobunaga's general, Mitsude, started a coup to overthrow him. He stormed the temple where Nobunaga was staying, and Nobunaga, convinced of his imminent defeat at the hands of his treacherous general, committed ritual suicide. After Nobunaga's death, Yasuke fled back to Azuchi Castle and entered the service of his son, Odo Nobutada. His son, however, also committed suicide after suffering defeat at the hands of the treacherous general. And after a long battle, Yasuke eventually surrendered. Yasuke apparently offered his sword to this new warlord, following the Western custom, but it was rejected. Now there's two versions of kind of what happened at the end here. In one version, Yasuke was called a barbarian because he also had, because he refused to commit ritual suicide. And in the other version of the story is that this new warlord sent him back to the church because he didn't want to have any problems with the Jesuits. Believing at the time he needed all the friends he could get, and he didn't really want to potentially go to war with a Western power in feudal Japan. But either way, Yasuke wasn't killed, and nothing is really recorded of what happened to Yasuke after this time. But I personally like to believe that he lived out the rest of his days in peace. Now there's one interesting saying that comes from round about this time, and that is, so there's an ancient Japanese proverb which says, for a samurai to be brave, he must have a bit of black blood. And there's a little part of me that likes to believe that this was in reference to Yasuke, but who really knows? So if you enjoyed this and you want to learn more Black history, you can check out my IG page, which is blackhistorybuff.com. There are going to be many more Instagram stories going up on IGTV for you to check out, for those who like some visuals to go along with the audio that I'm presenting. And if you're after teaching resources, you can head over to Patreon. The link is on my IG page at blackhistorybuff777, And if you like music, you can also find me on Spotify with the Classic Black playlist. The link to that is also on my IG page, which is Black History Buff 777. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to this recording. Please feel free to leave comments in the comment section, ask any questions. All feedback is welcome. Share with your friends, hit the notification button, and please just stay tuned. There's going to be many more episodes to come, and this has just been a wonderful experience of me just sharing our history and getting it out there to the world. So thank you all for joining me on my learning journey. It's been an honor and a privilege, and I appreciate you all so much. Thank you. So this recording is about Coretta Scott King. This is part of a segment called Hidden in Plain Sight, and it's about women from Black history who we don't really get to hear much about. Now, I know that Coretta Scott King is insanely famous. We all know the name, we know of her, but we don't really know much about her, or at least I can be honest and say I didn't know much about her. So this is me taking my opportunity to try and spread some extra information about her and get it out there. If you're unfamiliar with who I am the Black History Buff 777. You can find me on Instagram at Black History Buff 777. You can also find me on Facebook at Black History Buff 777. You can also find me on Patreon at Black History Buff 777 and on Facebook and Twitter at, amazingly, the inspirationally named Black History Buff 777. Yes, the name is Black History Buff 777. Please find me on Spotify, find me on YouTube, Twitter, Instagram, Patreon, especially on Patreon, because if you find me on Patreon, you'll actually find that you can get lots of goodies on there. There are teaching resources, videos, audio recordings, notes. There's going to be clothing going up soon. So Patreon is really the place to be if you want to find me, if you want to find more work, if you want to know what I'm really doing, if you want to get a little bit closer, if you're interested in my learning journey, if you have children and you're interested in teaching them, if you are a school teacher and you want some resources or some ideas for resources, Patreon is where you're going to find all that good stuff until my website goes up. So anyway, let's begin. So this recording is about Coretta Scott King. 2 quotes from her. I am not a symbol, I am an activist. Second quote from her. The media never understood Martin, so they will never understand Coretta. Coretta Scott King was born in Marion, Alabama, April 27th, 1927. The third of 4 children, her mother, Bernice McMurray Scott, was famous locally for her singing voice and fiercely committed to the education of her children. My children are going to college, even if it means I only have but one dress to put on, is a quote from her. I love that quote. It sounds like something my mum would say. Her father, Obie, a former policeman turned businessman, was one of the first people in their town to own a car. He and Bernice ran a clothing store, a general store, and a lumber mill. While not a wealthy family, the Scots' modest financial success drew envy from some of the locals, who in an act of racial hatred burned down 2 of the Scots' businesses. To help support the family during the Great Depression of the 1930s, a young Coretta worked picking cotton. I just want to talk a little bit about the Great Depression here, just to add some context into the time and why she would need to pick cotton. The Great Depression was the worst economic downturn in the history of the industrialized world. It lasted from 1929 to 1939 and began after the stock market crash of October 1929. That crash sent Wall Street into a panic and wiped out millions of investors. Millions of people lost their jobs. By 1930, there were 4.3 million people unemployed. By 1931, that had doubled to 8 million. In 1932, the number had risen to 12 million, and by early 1933, almost 13 million people were out of work, and the unemployment rate stood at an astonishing 25%. Those who managed to retain their jobs took pay cuts of a third or more. Now, I just want you to think about that. Imagine seeing the unemployment rate double in less than a year. Imagine having to just think about your work right now. Think about your job. Think about what you're doing. I don't know what you do, but you're out there somewhere working away. Imagine if your boss came to you and told you you're either fired or you take half of the money that you're struggling on now. And that's what you had to get on through life with. Bearing in mind, the cost of everything has stayed the same. And this was at a time when people regularly grew their own food. So imagine how much worse that would be now. Well, that's just some of the conditions that they were living through at that time. Out of work Americans filled long bread lines, begged for food, or sold apples on street corners just to get by. One Chicago social worker wrote at the time, "We saw want and despair walking the streets, and our friends, sensible, thrifty families, reduced to poverty." Coretta, 10 years of age, had already experienced racial terrorism and witnessed the devastating effects of poverty firsthand. And when you look at who she would become and the role she played in later life, you can almost see the hidden hand of fate shaping her into the woman that Martin and the world would need her to be. At age 12, Coretta started at Lincoln Elementary School, and due to the deep segregation in the South, had to be bused 8 miles there and back. And who was the bus driver? Yep, Bernice Scott, Coretta's mother, who bused all the local children to school. Bernice was a remarkable woman in her own right. She only had a 4th grade education herself, which only fueled her determination that all of her children would have a first-rate education. And I have this image of her in my head, kind of talking to herself saying, "You kids are going to school even if I have to drive you there myself," which indeed she did.
My mother was the kind of quiet, determined person who said, "My children will get an education if I don't have but one dress to put on." So I always knew that I was going to college, and I knew that I wanted to prepare myself because I had to free myself from the conditions of segregation and discrimination that I had grown up under. And in that process, I felt that it was important that I come back south and that I make my own contribution.
At school, Coretta thrived, probably because she had to give her mum a school report there and back every day, becoming the leading soprano for the school senior chorus, playing piano and trumpet, and graduating valedictorian in 1945. That same summer, Coretta applied for and was accepted into Antioch College in Yellow Springs, Ohio, majoring in education. Coretta's elder sister, Edith, had already become the first African American to enter the college 2 years previously. "One child down," I can hear her mother say. It is here at Antioch where Coretta became politically active. If you get a chance, go to the website for Antioch. In the Mission and History section, on paragraph 3, you'll find this statement. Horace Mann, first president of Antioch College, was an abolitionist and educational visionary. He was the father of Antioch College and of the American public school. We celebrate his role in leading the college and for providing generations of Antiochians, forgive my pronunciation, with the ethical direction to win victories for humanity. The motto for Antioch was, "Be ashamed to die until you have won some victory for humanity." And I just want to take this opportunity again to kind of just point out fate nudging Coretta to being this great woman. Her mother was a staunch educationalist. Her sister was the first colored person to attend this famous college with such an amazing motto. The motto of that same college was, "Be ashamed to die until you've won some victory for humanity." Again, you can just see like destiny just nudging her towards who she needed to become. Being the first African American to major in elementary education at Antioch created problems for Coretta. Her major required a 2-year internship, 1 year teaching in the Antioch private elementary school and the other in the Ohio public schools. The first year at the Antioch school, where Scott taught music, went well. The Yellow Springs School Board, however, refused to allow Scott to teach in its school system because she was black. The student body was integrated, containing both black and white students, but the faculty, the teachers and members of the administrative staff, were all white. Scott was given the option of going to Xenia, Ohio, and teaching in an all-black school, or taking the harder road and remaining at the Antioch private school for a second year. She chose to stay at the Antioch school. This discrimination made Scott more determined than ever. She joined the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, the NAACP, as well as a Race Relations Committee and a Civil Liberties Committee. She later said, "I was active on all of them from the first. I had been determined to get ahead, not just for myself, but to do something for my people and for all people. I took to heart the words of Horace Mann, "Be ashamed to die until you have won some victory for humanity." Scott's years at Antioch were rewarding despite her unfortunate teaching experience. She learned to work towards excellence and credited the school with helping her to believe that individuals as well as society could move towards the democratic ideal of brotherhood. It was there that Scott developed confidence that she could compete with, and I quote, "all people of all ethnic and cultural backgrounds, on their terms or on her own." She claimed that the total experience of Antioch was an essential element in preparing her for the role as wife of Martin Luther King and for her part in the civil rights movement. While there at Antioch, she realized that she wanted to continue in music and develop her voice to its fullest potential. She enrolled in a New England Conservatory in Boston, Massachusetts, and graduated in 1954 with a bachelor's degree in music. It was in Boston that she met Martin Luther King, Jr., who was then studying for his doctorate in systematic theology at Boston University. When she met her future husband, she was more involved in politics than he was. A mutual friend, Mary Powell, gave Coretta's phone number to Dr. King after he'd inquired about girls on campus. Initially, Coretta showed little interest in meeting him, even after Powell told her that he had a promising future. But eventually she relented and agreed to see him. King wooed her with lines such as, "The 4 things that I look for in a wife are character, personality, intelligence, and beauty, and you have them all."
But you went from Antioch, the great thrill was you got a full scholarship to study music, which was what you wanted to be until into your life walked this young man, 23 years of age. And
Well, yes, he did. Somehow he tried to convince me that on the first date that I was a person who had all the things that he wanted in a wife, and he had the audacity to name them. There were only 4. And
what were they?
Well, must I tell?
Oh, you don't have to tell. No, of course not. We can pass right. We let that one go right by you.
Having already decided to become a concert singer, Scott was reluctant to give up her career to be a preacher's wife. But when King proposed, after making him wait for 6 months for an answer, she eventually said yes. Coretta was still calling the shots on the wedding day when she frustrated Martin's Reverend Father, Martin Luther King Sr., by insisting that he take the word obey out of the wedding vows. After completing her degree in voice and piano at the New England Conservatory, she moved in with her husband to Montgomery, Alabama in September 1954. Mrs. King recalled,
"After we married, we moved to Montgomery, Alabama, where my husband had accepted an invitation to be the pastor of Dexter Avenue Baptist Church. Before long, we found ourselves in the middle of the Montgomery bus boycott, and Martin was elected leader of the protest movement. As the boycott continued, I had a growing sense that I was involved in something so much greater than myself, something of profound historic importance. I came to the realization that we had been thrust into the forefront of a movement to liberate oppressed people, not only in Montgomery, but also throughout our country, and this movement had worldwide implications. I felt blessed to have been called to be a part of such a noble and historic cause."
You can find posts about the Montgomery bus boycott and the role played by some of the more hidden figures in the boycott, such as Joe Ann Robinson, over on my Instagram page, Black History Buff 777, or at my Patreon, which is also Black History Buff 777. Back to the story. 8 weeks into the 381-day boycott, their house was bombed. Scott King and their 10-week-old firstborn, Yolanda, were at home but escaped uninjured. Terrified by the violence, Coretta's father and father-in-law urged the family, or at least her and the baby, to leave. She refused. "I realized how important it was for me to stand with Martin," she recalled in a 1966 essay in New Lady magazine. In the early years of the civil rights movement, Coretta worked relentlessly. She balanced motherhood and movement work, spoke before church organizations, civic groups, colleges, fraternal organizations, and peace groups. She orchestrated and performed a series of freedom concerts which combined prose and poetry, narration with musical selections. These concerts functioned as significant fundraisers for the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, the organization of which King served as the first president. "Women have been the backbone of the whole civil rights movement," Coretta observed in The New Lady. In Montgomery, after Rosa Parks triggered the bus boycott, it was mostly women, maids, cooks and such, who found other means of getting to their jobs. "Women have been the ones who made it possible for the movement to be a mass movement," Coretta said. Two of the issues that Coretta Scott King championed, world peace and economic justice, are often forgotten. She was present at the creation of the National Committee for a Sane Nuclear Policy in 1957 and represented Women's Strike for Peace at a nuclear disarmament conference in Geneva in 1962. When her husband received the Nobel Peace Prize in 1964, she stressed to him the role he must play in pursuing world peace. She considered it to be her burden as well. She pushed him publicly to come out against US involvement in Vietnam. He held back, fearing criticism, but she did not. In 1965, she addressed an anti-war rally at Madison Square Garden in New York. Later that year, she took her husband's place when he changed his mind about addressing a peace rally in Washington, D.C. Once, when asked if he had educated his wife on these issues, he said, "She educated me." When Martin Luther King was assassinated in 1968, 4 days after her husband was murdered, Coretta flew to Memphis, where he had gone to support a sanitation workers' strike, and led a march in his stead.
Good evening. Dr. Martin Luther King, the apostle of nonviolence in the civil rights movement, has been shot to death in Memphis, Tennessee. Police have issued an all-points bulletin for a well-dressed young white man seen running from the scene. Officers also reportedly chased and fired on a radio-equipped car containing 2 white men. Dr. King was standing on the balcony of a second-floor hotel room tonight when, according to a companion, a shot was fired from across the street. In the friend's words, the bullet exploded in his face.
3 weeks later, she delivered his planned speech at an anti-war protest in New York's Central Park. She was insistent that the best memorial was continued activism. King's assassination opened up a more public role for her. Later that spring, she helped lead the Poor People's Campaign, which he had conceived in the hopes of forcing the government and the nation to confront the realities of American poverty. From the balcony of Memphis's Lorraine Motel, where her husband had been shot, she rallied support for the Southern Caravan of Washington-bound protesters and declared a dream of her own. "Where not some, but all of God's children have food. Where not some, but all of God's children have decent housing. Where not some, but all of God's children have a guaranteed annual income in keeping with the principles of liberty and grace." She addressed some 50,000 people in June at the Lincoln Memorial, connecting racism, poverty, and the Vietnam War in an inspirational speech. After the Poor People's Campaign ended, her activism continued. She spoke at rallies, lobbied Congress to reject cuts in welfare spending. Coretta devoted enormous energy and commitment to building the Martin Luther King Jr. Center, commonly known as the King Center, based in Atlanta, Georgia, and in ways that years later would be repeated by Winnie Mandela, worked tirelessly to keep the memory of her husband alive, which famously culminated with the creation of Martin Luther King Day, which legally came into effect November 2nd, 1983. In the 1980s, she also joined the campaign against apartheid in South Africa, getting arrested outside the embassy in Washington. In the late 1990s, she became an advocate for gay rights and same-sex marriage, which drew condemnation from some civil rights leaders. But she connected the expansion of gay rights to the struggle for racial injustice, quoting her late husband, "Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere." During her lifetime, Coretta led discussions with heads of states, prime ministers, and presidents. She participated in protests alongside working-class people from all races and different walks of life. She met with many great spiritual leaders, including Pope John Paul, the Dalai Lama, Dorothy Day, and Bishop Desmond Tutu. She stood with Nelson Mandela in Johannesburg when he became South Africa's first democratically elected president. She was a woman of wisdom, grace, compassion, and vision. Coretta Scott King tried to make ours a better world, and in the process made history. On February 7th, 2006, Coretta died in Mexico from complications due to ovarian cancer. Many individuals and organizations paid tribute to Coretta following her death, including US President George W. Bush, the National Gay and National Black Justice Coalition, and her alma mater, Antioch College. She is buried alongside her husband in Atlanta, Georgia.
Hello, welcome to Netflix. My name is Barbara. How can I help you?
Hiya. I'm hoping you can help me. Who do I need to speak to about something that I've seen that isn't quite right on the platform? Is that you guys?
Right. Yes, of course you can. We can listen to you naturally.
Okay. Well, this is gonna seem like a trivial thing, but it's quite a big deal. I'm with my son today. He's only 5 years old, and he has his own little Netflix profile. And now he wanted to customize his avatar, and we went to pick a character, and we noticed that there are no black characters for him to pick. There's no one that looks like him at all.
All right.
Not a cartoon character, not a TV character. There are no black boys for him to pick as his avatar.
All right, sir. I see. No, that is a very valid complaint. I'm gonna definitely pass it further, and we'll do everything to do something about it.
Okay. And so how can I follow this up? Is there a reference? Will I get an email? Can I email anybody? Because this is quite a big thing. I mean, millions of people have this account, and there must be other black boys and girls out there who want to see themselves.
Naturally, no, of course. All our conversations, our phone calls are recorded, actually. So I'm gonna pass just the number of this phone call to our supervisors, so they will listen to it. So you have my word that this complaint will be heard, and we'll do everything to fix that. Because you're right, that's not quite right. That there's no avatar for boys.
Okay. Not just boys. There are boys on there, but there are no black boys. Black boys. That's what's important. Okay, so how can I will someone contact me? Can I follow this up?
No, we have unfortunately no way of contacting our customers. But this is their way of like informing us about it, and we'll do everything to fix that, to take a look at that.
Okay. Well, I'm hoping that Netflix does decide to do something about this. Representation is important, and I'll be calling back.
All right, naturally, of course, sir.
Okay. All right.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Yes. Thank you. Have a lovely day.
Andrew. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Dad.
Netflix customer service. This is Cynthia speaking. How may I help you?
Good afternoon. Did you say this was Cynthia?
Yes, it is.
Hi, Cynthia. Could I possibly speak to a member of management, Cynthia?
And what's this concerning, sir?
Well, I called up with a concern it's a few weeks back now, and I was hoping to actually hear something from Netflix or that the issue would be addressed, but nothing's really happened. And so, yeah, I was just wondering if I could speak to a manager rather than kind of bore you with the details.
Let me check if there's anybody available. One moment, please.
Yeah, sure.
Thank you for holding, sir.
Hi.
The supervisor wants to know exactly what is concerning because nobody left a note on your account on what the issue was.
So that's even more disturbing because I called last time and I specifically remembering asking about the complaints process and procedure, and I was told that notes would be taken and so on. So there's no registering of any complaint on the system at all. Nothing.
No, nothing at all.
Okay, well, will there be notes taken this time, Cynthia?
Yeah.
Yeah?
Fire away.
Okay, so basically I called last time because whilst using the platform, I was with my son and we were trying to select an avatar, and whilst trying to do so, we realised that there were no black words to choose from, like none whatsoever. And like representation is really important.
Okay.
Yeah. I know. Okay. How do I explain to my 5-year-old why his face just isn't on there? There's no one who looks like him or his friends.
Okay, I understand. So, okay, let me talk that through to our supervisor, and if he will take the call. One moment, please. I have registered everything, so I'm gonna lay it. I'm gonna tell him about it. One moment, please.
Thank you. Hello.
Welcome to Netflix. How can I help you?
Hiya. I was just making a customer service call and was about to get through to a manager, and I was unfortunately cut off.
What was the issue regarding with when you were getting transferred to a manager?
Okay, so basically I called last time because whilst using the platform, I was with my son and we were trying to select an avatar, and whilst trying to do so, we realised that there were no black words to choose from, like none whatsoever. And like representation is really important.
That's why we were calling.
Okay, well, let me just contact a colleague, and I'll get a manager back to you to speak to you. Okay?
Thank you.
Right, bear with me 1 second. I'm just gonna put you on hold. Okay?
Okay.
Hello, sir.
Hiya.
Thank you for waiting, sir. I just want to let you know that we're currently experiencing a queue, okay? But I just want to let you know, is it the cartoon avatars that you can't find any...
Go on, sorry, keep going.
Is it the... so, I understand that you said that you can't find any black avatars. Is it the cartoony ones that you can't find?
Okay, so, I'm on the platform, I'm using obviously, I'm using a child's profile for my son, and yeah, we've gone through and we've had a look, and there's no one who looks like him, there's no young black boys that he can choose from, and there's no option for us to upload our own.
Okay, just to let you know, sir, we do take these issues really seriously, and we are a very diverse company. We don't discriminate any race, sexuality, gender, or anything else like that.
I'm not saying that at all. But or let me put it this way: I'm just making a call about representation, and I'm just pointing out that when I had this conversation last time, I was informed that the call would be escalated, and when I've called and spoken to the previous assistant before you, whose name was Cynthia, Cynthia has kindly informed me that no call was logged, and so therefore no complaint was escalated. So I'm not drawing any conclusions from that, but yeah, nothing happened.
Right. So what I'll do is because at the minute we're currently experiencing a queue. Once I'm able to reach someone, I'll basically let them know about your suggestion, and then we'll put it through the log. Okay. I'll also put a note on your account as well that you've called about this issue as well. Okay. But yeah, it's just to save you time because at the minute we are experiencing a queue. Okay. So I will help you with your suggestion today. Okay.
Hello, you've asked to speak to a supervisor at Netflix. My name's Matt. I believe I'm speaking to Kurt.
Yes. Hi, Matt. Hi.
How are you doing? You okay?
I'm okay. I'm good.
Yeah. How can I help you?
Have your colleagues explained the situation at all?
Briefly, but I'd like to get your views as well, if that's okay.
Yeah, sure. I'll explain again.
Okay, so basically I called last time because whilst using the platform, I was with my son and we were trying to select an avatar, and whilst trying to do so, we realised that there were no black boys to choose from, like none whatsoever. And like representation is really important.
You know?
Yeah. What you've raised it's interesting. It's very relevant, and it's something that I need to take note of definitely, because when we speak of avatars and when we speak of what we do, there's only 4 countries in the world where Netflix is not available.
Okay.
which obviously it's a big issue if culturally we don't incorporate everybody into the avatars.
Exactly, and that's the reason why I'm calling, because sometimes, as big a company as we are, if nobody tells you, you can't do anything.
Yeah.
And I haven't called and ranted or raved or screamed or shout. In fact, I've actually put forward solutions. But if nobody if that gets blocked, then nothing can be done, and perhaps this then becomes a bigger issue down the road that it doesn't necessarily need to be. So this is me kind of calling nicely now.
It makes a lot of sense, especially when the children are included as well.
Exactly.
If you can share the information with you, so the service itself is not available in the Crimea, in Syria, in China and North Korea. For reasons obvious. But that leaves many countries that do have the service from all walks of life as well.
Of course.
So yeah, avatars really, they should encapsulate everybody.
They should,
especially when if we speak of the Middle East as an example as well. I mean, obviously people have a certain, for want of a better word, a certain style, let's say. You know? And obviously everybody looks different, and it really should encapsulate that. That said, it is really, really good feedback. I do appreciate it.
Okay, so I'm glad that you kind of have that approach. So what can happen? What can happen from here? What should I expect? Because I'm raising this as a customer, and I'm going to be honest. I'm not going to let it go. I'm not just going to kind of fade into the background. Like I do expect some follow up. I would like some follow up or some communication.
If there's
a customer,
if there's any sort of if there's any sort of follow up, it's not going to come from here. From where I am.
Okay.
This is because it's just a centralized customer service unit. Yeah.
Yep.
But what I can do is submit the feedback on your behalf.
Okay.
And obviously push it to the right place and make reference to your Netflix account itself, which we don't have an ID number as you speak of, but we do have the email address as the reference point, and that is unique to your account. You see?
Okay.
Aside from that, as a supervisor as well, I need to make sure that I take full extensive notes on the discussion that we've had.
Fantastic.
So this will be logged in research for the account itself.
Okay.
Which is very good.
So what I'm hearing you say is that effectively you'll ensure that notes will be made on the account that this has been flagged. You will push it to the appropriate level for your, how can I put it, for your level of accountability. Okay, so when it gets to that point, again, as the customer, what kind of feedback's there? If I had an IT issue, I would expect that a ticket was generated and then a case would be opened, and when my issue was resolved, I'd get an email saying like my ticket's closed. What's the version of that in this scenario? Is there a version of that in this scenario?
The thing is, if it goes to a certain department and they deem it a very, very important action, which I believe it is, then they should respond accordingly, and they would always respond via email if they're going to do that.
Okay, and would that email necessarily come to myself?
It's the only reference we have for you, the email address on file.
So really, what I'm asking is, I should Netflix take this seriously, as we both agree that it should be, I should expect some form of email communication?
I think it's a very serious point that you've made, absolutely. I want to give you a piece of extra information too, if you don't mind.
No.
Can you put this in writing as well?
Most definitely.
Yeah, perfect. Good.
This
is something that should have been given to you earlier, really.
Yeah, most definitely. And what address would I need to send that to?
Yeah, this is a written address, if you don't mind.
Okay, that's fine. Just give me a minute. I'm just going to make some notes.
It really would cover all tracks, you see.
Yep, I fully understand. I hear what you're saying. Thank you.
Yeah, so if you do your bit, I'll do my bit, and let's hope we can get this sorted, eh?
Fantastic. That's great. Thank you very much. I really appreciate that call. I appreciate that.
I appreciate the point you've made. It's very relevant to the modern world. It's very cool.
Crimson red glistened grimly in stark contrast against pristine white snow. Even in death, colour seemed to mock him. Clutching his stomach, breath freezing in the air, he watched blood flow from him as freely as ink once did from his pen. Survivor of countless duels, Alexander Pushkin wondered if his life was fated to always end this way. This is King Carouse, the Black History Buff, and welcome to the Black History Buff podcast. Each episode will be going through another chapter from Black History and showcasing one of the amazing characters from Black History. You can find us on Instagram at BlackHistoryBuff777 and at BHB Media 777, also on Instagram. So please, kick back, relax, and enjoy today's show. Born in 18th century Russia, Alexander Pushkin was Russian nobility and would eventually become immortalized as the father of Russian literature. Pushkin was born in Moscow on the 26th of May, 1799. His great-grandfather was Abraham Petrovich Gannibal. Gannibal, sometimes written Hannibal, was very young when he was kidnapped from Africa and sent to Constantinople as a captive. From there, he was brought to the court of Peter the Great in St. Petersburg. The Tsar became very fond of the young boy. He made him his godson, giving him his name, Petrovich, meaning son of Peter, and sent him to study in France. Gannibal's rank and accomplishments eventually allowed him noble status. This status permitted Pushkin, aged 12, to enter the freshly created Imperial Lycee, a school for the elite, at St. Petersburg. Described at the time by his teachers as lazy, inattentive in class, and immodest, and as making mediocre progress. Pushkin stunned those very same teachers 3 years later when, aged only 15, he published his first poem to national acclaim. The fantastic thing about this poem was that it was written in Russian and not French, which was the language of the elite at that time. By the age of 18, Pushkin was the most famous writer in all Russia. Known as much for his witty sarcasm as his writing, no one was safe from his cutting commentary, and he collected as many enemies as he did supporters. Pushkin took the Russian language to new heights, expressing the plight of ordinary people in words of living beauty. He represented love in so many aspects and new forms that it was impossible for Russian poets to speak of love in the ordinary sense of the word again. This is one of his poems. I loved you once, nor can this heart be quiet, for it would seem that love still lingers there. But do not you be further troubled by it. I would in no wise hurt you, O my dear. I loved you without hope, a mute offender. What jealous pangs, what shy despairs I knew. A love as deep as this, as true, as tender. God grant another may yet offer you. This was 18th century Russia, and approximately 40 million Russians were caught in a system of serfdom, or as we would call it now, slavery. Forced to work from morning till night, whipped, branded, and sold like cattle, families were sold from estate to estate and torn apart in the process. Pushkin, being from one of the noble Russian families, was spared from this torture, but the misery of the people touched his soul, and he used his pen to express the plight of the masses and fight for liberty, declaring that the serfs were men and brothers, not chattels. He was the first writer of note to say this. This is an ode to liberty written by Pushkin. O shake and shiver, tyrants of the world, but lend an ear, ye fallen slaves, gain courage and rise. His poem stirred the spirit of the people to such an extent that in 1820 he was eventually arrested and almost banished to the frozen waste of Siberia. But even then he continued to move the people and speak out against the brutal oppression. In December 1825, a secret society inspired by his writings made an attack on the new Tsar, Nicholas. The plot failed, and several of the men were executed. Others were banished to Siberia. Pushkin, who was not there during the attack, escaped punishment. However, his name had been discovered on the books of the society. Knowing how popular Pushkin was with the masses, Nicholas decided that winning him over was the best course of action, and so the two rulers met in the Tsar's palace. The following is my description of what took place. A log fire burned fiercely in the palace throne room, casting amber light and brooding shadows across the two men as they faced each other like opposing pieces on a chessboard. Nicholas, master of the people's bodies, was white. Pushkin, master of the people's hearts, played black. White moved first. The Tsar spoke. Were you a friend of the conspirators against me? Pushkin, back, now turned to the fire, casting a shadow over the Tsar in a sign of complete disrespect, replied, That is true, your majesty. I love those so-called conspirators deeply, and I shall ever love and esteem them. What would you have done had you been in St. Petersburg on the 14th of December, Nicholas asked. I should have been in the ranks of the rebels, Pushkin coolly replied. That would have caused us great sorrow, replied the Tsar. We are grateful for all you have done for Russia, and wish you to always be near us. We name you Imperial Historian. Check. Pushkin, realizing that accepting this position would tie him to the very establishment he was trying to bring down, declined. However, the Tsar persisted, countering Pushkin's defense by making an offer Pushkin could not refuse, while also providing his opponent with the opportunity to keep advancing Russian literature and poetry from his new position. Boxed in, Pushkin reluctantly accepted. Checkmate. From his new position, Pushkin's star rose even higher. People fought to publish his work for vast sums of money, but Pushkin hated this new environment, preferring to be with the people. He once said, When I meet fools and hypocrites, it is all I can do to keep from biting them. As his fame continued to grow, so did the number of his enemies. Unable to compete with him intellectually, they sought to make fun of his ancestry. There goes the Negro, a descendant of cannibals, is one quote. A black man badly whitened, is another. His detractors claimed he was the descendant of African monkeys. Rather than refute the claims, Pushkin mocked them by doubling down on them, writing, I pleasure the young beauties with the unbridled furies of my African passion. There was some truth in this, as Pushkin's love affairs were legendary. Finally, unable to break his spirit by attacking his colour, his enemies decided to strike through his wife, Natalie, spreading rumours of infidelity. Two of his main enemies circulated anonymous letters saying that Natalie had been unfaithful to Pushkin with the Tsar. In 1836, Pushkin, believing he had finally found the source of one of these writings, a Baron Heckeren, a French ambassador, challenged his son, Baron Dianthes, to a duel. Pushkin could not, due to the age and position of Heckeren, challenge him directly, so he did the next best thing, and besides, Dianthes had already been paying far too much attention to Pushkin's wife, and so was a legitimate target in his own right. Dianthes, however, avoided the duel by declaring that he was only showing attention to Pushkin's wife to get close to her sister. And while dubious, Pushkin withdrew the challenge. The peace did not last, as Dianthes continued to pay attention to Pushkin's wife even after marrying her sister. Rumours spread like wildfire, and Pushkin's enemies fanned the flames of the gossip with glee. Finally, Pushkin had enough and reissued the duel. This time, bound by honour, Dianthes was forced to accept. The two men met at dawn in February 1837. In snow and biting wind, the two men faced each other, pistols drawn. Crack! Dianthes fired first, hitting Pushkin in the abdomen. With weakened aim and unsteady, Pushkin shot back. Crack! Dianthes was hit. It was just a flesh wound. Pushkin's wound, however, proved to be fatal, and he died 2 days later. Pushkin's death caused outrage in Russia. The poet of the people was dead. The Tsar, fearing a revolt, ordered a private funeral, but concerned that this would further inflame the anger of the people, had Pushkin's body secretly buried at night outside St. Petersburg. Dianthes and his father were driven out of Russia, and Pushkin's enemies were hunted down one by one and either executed or exiled. But even this did not quiet the people, and the Tsar had to eventually resort to banning mention of Pushkin's name in public. Despite this, Pushkin's name lived on in the heart of the people, and he and his writings are now inseparably bound with literature and Russian culture. In the dimly lit cabin, the tall, muscular man stared at the dark-skinned figure in the painting intensely. "Tell me about this man," he asked without turning. "Who? Cinque?" His comrade Robert Purvis replied. "Yes, tell me about this Cinque," the man said, eyes still fixed on the image. As Purvis, the famous abolitionist, began to tell the tale of Cinque and the mutiny on the Amistad, a plan started to form in the mind of Madison Washington. He would leave the safety of Canada and return to Virginia and take back his wife Susan from the beasts who held her captive, and nothing would stop him. This is King Carouse, the Black History Buff, and welcome to the Black History Buff podcast. Each episode will be going through another chapter from Black history and showcasing one of the amazing characters from Black history. You can find us on Instagram at Black History Buff 777 and at BHB Media 777, also on Instagram. So please kick back, relax, and enjoy today's show. This is the story of Madison Washington and the mutiny on the brig Creole. Not much is known about Madison Washington's life. Most of what we know about this heroic man came from the writings of Frederick Douglass and pieced together accounts from articles written at the time. According to legend, Madison was an enslaved African born in Virginia, known for his ebony-coloured skin, chiseled African features, and keen intellect. Madison longed for freedom, and the embers of discontentment grew into a burning desire for emancipation when, aged 20, he met his wife-to-be, Susan. With the aim of securing liberty before becoming married, the pair plotted their escape. Disaster struck when their plans were discovered. To avoid Susan being moved to a separate plantation, the couple agreed that Madison should escape in the hopes that he could one day return and secure her freedom. Madison hid out in nearby woods for months trying to find other men who also desired freedom, attempting to rise up a rebellion, but was unable to galvanize any of the men he came across into action. Eventually, the pair, still in contact, agreed that Madison should flee to Canada, secure employment, and earn enough money to return and buy back her freedom. Reluctantly, Madison made the treacherous journey to Canada, where he eventually secured work in a local farm. Though safe and comfortable, his lowly wage meant it would take a minimum of 5 years before he earned enough to purchase the liberty of his wife. The thought of being away from his love for this length of time, without his protection and under the constant fear of being moved to another plantation, tormented Madison and eventually compelled him to make the journey back to Virginia to attempt a rescue mission. While traveling, Madison equipped himself with files, saws, and other implements and hid them in his clothing in case he became captured and needed to escape. On entering Ohio, Madison met many of those whom he had seen on his journey to Canada, and during each encounter, he was encouraged to give up his quest, and each time he refused, saying, "Liberty is worth nothing to me while my wife is a slave." As Madison got nearer to the old farm, his former place of enslavement, he became more and more cautious and began to travel exclusively by night in the woods to avoid detection. When he finally arrived at the old farm, Madison meticulously mapped out the area and tried to obtain information about the location of his wife. One evening, he heard the nearby singing from a corn shucking, and in the hope of gathering more information, snuck in unnoticed. Though thirsty and hungry, he avoided joining the festivities for fear of being recognized, and instead stuck to the fringes quietly, piecing together stories from various men until he eventually had the location of his beloved Susan. She was still with her old master. On hearing this, Madison, tired, thirsty, hungry, and desperate to see his wife, cast away all his previous planning and made a do-or-die bid to rescue Susan that same night. The following is my account of what took place. Madison climbed in through the half-open window at the back of the old farmhouse and stealthily made his way up the stairs towards the room of his beloved. He had done this so many times he moved more from muscle memory than conscious effort. At the end of the corridor, he saw the door that led to the room of his beloved. Memories of her hit him like a tidal wave, taking his breath away and stopping him dead in his tracks. The taste of her lips, the smell of her skin, the sound of her laugh, and... "Help! There's a runaway in the house! Come quick, fellas!" Before Madison could comprehend what was happening, 5 white men were already on him. He drew a club from inside his jacket and let muscle memory take over once again. Thwack! One man down. Thwack! Another hit the floor. The sound of hard wood against bone rang out as a third man crumpled to the ground. He rounded to strike the 4th when pain erupted from the back of his head. Dazed, he tried to turn towards the source of the agony and felt a searing sensation in his right shoulder. His legs buckled and blows began to rain down on him from all sides. Powerful arms gripped him from behind and began dragging him towards the stairs. With pain ripping through his body, vision clouded by his own blood, Madison looked up and saw her. Susan. He drew breath to call out her name and... whack. Everything went black. Sometime later, Madison opened his eyes, head pounding, bleeding, and in shackles. He could hear the jangling of chains, the galloping of horses, the creak of wood against wood, and the slow, lurching, chugging noise of wheels as they turned on their axles. He looked around and saw 20 men, black men, shackled as he was. Oh no, he groaned weakly before passing out again. The next time Madison awoke, he could smell salt in the air and feel the floor he was chained to roll gently underneath him. As the sound of waves hit his ears, realization struck him. He was on a slave ship. So this is the part in a normal podcast where there'd be an advert, but I don't actually have any sponsors. So instead, I'm going to ask that you like, share, and if you're listening on Apple Podcasts, leave a review and preferably 5 stars. It makes a huge difference to people finding out about the podcast and getting a bit more exposure and getting our wonderful stories out there for more and more people to hear. I'm also going to ask that if you're really enjoying things, that you head over to my Patreon account. It's www.patreon.com, search for Black History Buff, and consider leaving a donation. Any amount left is welcome. On there you'll find exclusive content, early access to episodes of the podcast, as well as exclusive and early access to blog posts and fact files as well, and any other goodies that I can think of to throw up on there. So please, take a minute, consider heading over to my Patreon, and please like, share, and leave a review on Apple Podcasts. Now anyway, back to the show. The American transatlantic slave trade was outlawed in 1808, and though a small, illegal trade continued, the legal slave trade in the southern states boomed. By 1841, hundreds of slave ships had voyaged down the southeastern coast of North America and along the Gulf Coast to New Orleans. This was the route taken by the brig Creole and the now chained and prostrate Madison, Washington. The brig departed from Richmond, Virginia at midnight on Monday the 25th of October 1841, under the command of Captain Robert Ensor. By the time the ship reached open water a week later, the vessel had accumulated a cargo of 135 human beings. As was usual on these domestic voyages, the enslaved were able to occupy the deck during the day. At night, however, the men and women were confined below, separated by stacks of boxed tobacco as a way of keeping the men and women apart. It was in this space that Madison found himself. Once allowed on deck, Madison quickly threw himself into all the tasks given to him on the ship. The crew, believing they had broken his spirit, readily increased his duties, eventually giving him the run of the vessel and a new role. Meanwhile, at night, he and 3 others, Doc Ruffin, Elijah Morris, and Ben Blacksmith, carefully mapped out the spaces on the vessel along with the routines of the ship's crew. Washington, in his new role of head cook for the slaves, was able to find allies amongst the captive men as he served them food. He used this opportunity to stash weapons and picks around the ship ready for any chance. On the 9th day of the voyage, the Creole encountered rough seas which made several of the men very sick. Because a number of the enslaved were ill, the overseers did not watch them correctly, and this created the perfect opportunity for Washington and his men to attack. Night came on. The first watch had just been summoned. The wind was blowing high when Madison succeeded in reaching the quarterdeck, followed by 18 others, all of whom sprang to different parts of the vessel, seizing whatever they could wield as weapons. The crew were nearly all on deck. Captain Ensign and Mr. Merritt, the first mate, were standing together, while Hewitt was seated on the companion smoking a cigar. The appearance of all the slaves at once and the loud and commanding attitude of their leader so completely surprised them that they completely froze. The officers were all shocked, but so swift were the motions of Madison and his crew that they had nearly lost command of the vessel before they even attempted to use their weapons. Hewell, who had spent a significant portion of his life working on plantations as a, quote, Negro driver, knew what the defiant looks of these men meant and was the first to move. Drawing his old horse pistol from his coat, he fired at one of the men and killed him. The next moment, Hewell lay dead on the deck. Madison had struck him with an iron bar, and the fight now began in earnest, with the passengers as well as the crew all taking part. Madison was in his element during battle, and he took out all of his frustrations on the ship's crew, his slavery, separation from his wife, his recapture, and the beating. He took it all out on the ship's men that night. He would be free that day or die. Merritt and Gifford, the first and second mates of the vessel, both attacked him at the same time. Both were stretchered out on the deck with a single blow each. The sailors ran up the rigging for safety, and shortly after, the battle was won, and Madison Washington was the master of the brig Creole. After his crew had covered the slaver's deck, Madison forbade the shedding of more blood and ordered those sailors to come down, which they did. A guard was placed over everyone except Merritt, who was retained to navigate the vessel. At first, they wished to travel to Liberia, but once realizing that the ship did not have enough supplies to make the voyage, they forced Merritt to steer them towards the Bahamas on pain of death. All things now secure, and the white men in chains or under guard, Madison ordered that the shackles be removed from the enslaved men and women. The next morning, Captain Washington, as he was now called, ordered the cook to provide the best breakfast that the storeroom could furnish, intending to surprise his comrades and especially the females who he had not seen yet. What Madison didn't know is that his wife Susan, the woman he had risked life and liberty for, would be there to greet him at the breakfast table. Yes, that's right, his wife Susan was on the brig. The meeting of the hero and his beautiful wife, the tears of joy and the cheers that followed from the men can be better imagined than described. Thanks to his courage and boldness, Madison had not only gained his liberty and that of 134 others, but his dear Susan was now finally safe. So at this point, the story should be over, right? Madison had saved his wife. 135 slaves were now free. Roll credits. The end. Well, not quite. You see, Americans, in particular Southern Americans of that time, did not see black people of any kind as human. So for them, this rebellion was a bit like being kicked out of bed by your pet cat. A pet cat who also happened to tell you that, oh, by the way, I know you paid a lot of money for me at the cat shop, but yeah, I'm not your cat anymore, and you're welcome for me and my cat buddies deciding not to kill you. P.S. I'm off to go and live as a free cat with your English neighbour that you hate. Meow. You see, what I'd failed to mention previously is that the British had abolished slavery in all its forms in 1833. So when Madison and his clever crew asked to be taken to the Bahamas, it wasn't because of its fabulous beaches and beautiful women. It was because they knew that the Bahamas was in British territory and that they'd be covered by British law. When the Creole landed in Nassau, Madison and his crew were actually uncertain if they would be welcomed or arrested, and neither were Ensign Gifford and his team. As boarding vessels approached the ship, the formerly enslaved threw their weapons overboard and began to laugh and joke as if nothing strange had happened on the ship. I can imagine the tension mounting as the first of the Bahamian soldiers came on board the Creole, both sides trying to work out how this encounter would go down. I can also imagine the look on the faces of Ensign and co. when they saw the shining black skin of the officers as they entered the ship, the big smiles they broke out into, heard the laughter, and then heard the cheers as they welcomed, and I quote, their brothers and sisters to the island. Seriously, in my mind, the scene looks more like a cookout than a stakeout. Yeah, we have those in England too, or as we call them, barbecues. Okay, so now we roll credits, right? Well, not yet. There was the small matter of the man who had been killed on board, and because of that, Madison and 18 other men were arrested on charges of murder. Because a murder had been committed, a formal investigation had to commence, and Ensign and co. used this time to hatch a plot to retake the vessel from the British. The plan was to take the ship by force and snatch as many slaves as they could grab along the way. The first stage of the plot was to obtain weapons. The plan never actually got to stage 2 because stage 1 proved to be a lot more challenging than they'd bargained for. What Ensign and co. had not accounted for was the fact that the free blacks of the island had all been former slaves. Some had even arrived there from ships that had been wrecked only a few years earlier. So this Caribbean island, inhabited by former Jamaican, Haitian and American ex-slaves, simply refused to sell Ensign any weapons. In fact, they refused to sell them anything. When Ensign attempted to approach the whites living on the island, in a show of solidarity that we could do more of seeing today, they also refused to sell them anywhere. Defeated, Ensign did what any red-blooded American would do, and took his case to court, which was duly thrown out. The British ruling that the men had, and I quote, the revolutionary right to freedom, and dropped all charges of murder and piracy. And there we have it, folks. A runaway slave, a love story, a courthouse drama, and the real Pirates of the Caribbean. I hope you enjoyed it. Well, actually, hang on. There's one last thing. Not all the slaves chose to take their freedom. Rachel Glover, a young girl named Mary, 2 other women and one of their sons chose to sail back with Ensign and his crew. We don't actually know why they chose to stay, but they may have returned in the hopes of being reunited with children, husbands and other family members. When writing this, I seriously considered leaving that part out, but I think it helps to highlight the terrible choices that the institution of slavery forced on black women and shows just how powerful a mother's love can really be. So this particular show, I'm dedicating to my mum. She didn't have to choose between freedom and slavery, but as a single mother, she didn't have very many choices at all. And like many other amazing black women, she protected us, nurtured us, educated us, prayed for us, and ensured that we wanted for nothing. Not time, not attention, and most certainly not love. So if you're listening to this, give your mum a call, or whoever you choose to call mum, and tell her you love her. Go on, do it now. Give her a call. Alright, so finally, that's the end. That particular story of Madison, Washington really stood out to me for a lot of reasons. Mainly because it's one of the few historical love stories that I've been able to find on my whole journey through Black history. Now, I know that they're out there, I know they exist, but for those who followed me on Instagram and followed me on my pages, you'll know that I'm sharing as I'm learning, and I'm a bit of an investigator, sniffing out the stories and seeing where they take me. It's all about the characters and the emotion and the chapters and the excitement. And this is the first, or one of the first, love stories that I've come across. And I think what's spectacular about this one is the fact it shows the lengths that he went to get his wife back. You know, he obtained his freedom and he elected to risk giving his freedom up to go and get his wife. He refused to give up. And I especially love the true element of him being inspired by Cinque and the Amistad. I mean, the Amistad is probably the most famous rebellion at sea. However, I believe it's 54 men were freed on the Amistad, as opposed to 135 men and women who were freed on the Brig Creole, the most successful slave rebellion of all time. And I think, apart from all the other wonderful things, the love story, the rebellion, the courthouse drama, the shows of solidarity that I saw in this story, one of the things that really stood out for me in this tale is how the role of being inspired by historical events can influence today's decision. It makes you wonder, if Madison had never seen that picture of Cinque, would he have even fought to stage rebellion at sea? The fact that Cinque had did it laid out the blueprint and the foundation for him to hatch his own plan. And that, for me, is the beauty of studying history. A lot of the time people look at history as just the dead past, but for me, where other people see graves and old stories, I see blueprints. I see people who have done it before, who've succeeded, and who've laid out a map and a pattern that I can follow. I go to my 9-to-5 job every day, and I call it the plantation. And you know what? My ancestors were on real plantations, and they escaped. And they laid down the blueprint for me to escape.
Old pirates, yes, they rob I, sold I to the merchant ships. Minutes after they took I from the bottomless pit, but my hand was made strong by the hand of the Almighty. We forward in this generation triumphantly. Won't you help to sing these songs of freedom? 'Cause all I ever have, redemption songs, redemption songs.
The sound of the bell cut through the rambunctious roaring of the crowd. Breathing heavily, Bill, the Black Devil Richmond, looked down at his fists. Yup. Bleeding. He touched the corner of his lip with his tongue. Yup. That's bleeding too. He squinted over at his opponent in the opposite corner. The bare-chested man was muscular, half his age, and looked fresh as a daisy. The 51-year-old Bill could feel what felt like a heartbeat pulsating on the bruised right side of his face, and realized that that side of the world had gone dark. He was blind in one eye. Bollocks, thought Bill as he walked out from his corner. This was going to be another long fight. This is King Carouse, the Black History Buff, and welcome to the Black History Buff podcast. Each episode will be going through another chapter from Black History and showcasing one of the amazing characters from Black History. You can find us on Instagram at Black History Buff 777 and at BHB Media 777, also on Instagram. So please kick back, relax, and enjoy today's show. When we think about black sports stars, we often go to names such as Muhammad Ali, Jackie Robinson, perhaps Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, or even Jack Johnson. However, if we dig a little deeper and look a little harder, we might come across the story of Bill Richmond, the first black sports star. Bill Richmond was born on the 8th of August 1763 in Staten Island, which at the time was an outpost of the British colonies. His parents were both enslaved persons, and Bill's prestigious talents would never have been discovered had a British soldier named Hugh Percy not convinced the brute keeping a young Bill captive to release him into his care. Bill's natural intelligence, wit and tenacity had struck a chord with Percy, who brought the 14-year-old Richmond to England with him and set him up as an apprentice cabinet maker in Yorkshire. It may be hard to believe this, but at that time, 1777, the number of black people living in Britain was fairly large, many having had their freedom restored to them in exchange for fighting against the American rebels in the War of Independence. However, less surprisingly, on entering Britain, they faced extreme racism. The smartly dressed, confident and literate Richmond was an instant target for the small-minded bigots of Britain, and the young Bill found himself in numerous bruising encounters and brawls as he defended himself from the insults thrown at him from the small-minded men of that time. It was during these encounters that Richmond began to hone his fighting talent as he handed out beating after beating to his racial abusers. In the words of one of the leading boxing writers of the day, Pierce Egan, Richmond taught his detractors that it was wrong to discriminate against a man on account of his country or his colour. Richmond's reputation as a man of honour and fighting prowess began to grow, and in 1795 he moved to London. Prize fighting was one of the leading sports in that era, and Richmond, feeling confident after years of handing out beatings in Yorkshire, spontaneously challenged seasoned veteran George Maddox to a match in January 1804. Richmond lost the bout in 9 close rounds, with one brutalising blow opening up a dangerous cut over his left eye. Okay, so before we go any further, I need to explain that the sport Richmond was partaking in was bare knuckle boxing. I want you to think about all the famous boxing matches you've ever seen or heard about. Ali versus Frazier, Tyson versus Holyfield, Fury versus Kichlenko. Hell, even Rocky versus Ivan Drago. And throw all that in the bin. There were no gloves, no judges, and no points. Rounds lasted as long as they lasted, and fights could often go on for hours. If you were left standing at the end, you won. This was a brutal sport, and looking at it through modern eyes, you might wonder why Richmond, a moderately successful man in his own right, and at roughly 40 years old, might want to put himself through all that. But I believe that what fueled Richmond was the years of abuse that he endured. First as a boy in America, then as a young man in Yorkshire. A black man living in those times just had to take it with no chance of recourse and even lesser chance of justice. And so I believe that Richmond sought his own justice in the ring. After his punishing defeat, a less determined man would have possibly quit the sport. But in 1805, Richmond made a successful comeback, defeating a Jewish boxer by the name of Yusuf, who was left, air quotes, totally disfigured after 6 vicious rounds. Richmond quickly followed this with a win over Jack Holmes in another one-sided beating likened to, at the time, air quotes, a public slaughter. These and other victories opened up the possibility of a rematch with Richmond's nemesis George Maddox in 1809. The fight took place in August, and Richmond battered Maddox across a bloody 52 rounds. 52 rounds. 52 rounds. Do you know how much you must have to hate someone in order to fight them for 52 rounds? I can't think of anything I can do for 52 rounds. I don't even think I can think of anything I can do for 2 rounds. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge. Anyway, back to the show. At the end of the battle, his 52 rounds, Maddox was described as hideously disfigured, but all who watched the contest agreed that the skill and bravery of the two men went without question. Now, wealthy from his winnings, reputation enhanced, Richmond wisely invested his money into property, becoming the owner and landlord of the Horse and Dolphin pub near Leicester Square. During this time, Richmond began to tutor other young fighters, one of whom was the young, gifted and black boxer Tom Molyneux, who under Richmond's tutelage went on to fight the British champion Tom Cribb in one of the most contested boxing bouts in British history. But I'll tell that story in another episode. Richmond, due to some financial losses, was eventually forced back into the ring. He fought a Jack Davis in 1814 and then in 1815 took on his riskiest fight when aged an unbelievably 51. Black really doesn't crack. He fought and defeated Tom Shelton, who was half his age. It was an epic battle with Richmond eventually defeating Shelton. Richmond, due to some financial losses, was eventually forced back into the ring. He fought a Jack Davis in 1814 and in 1815 took on his riskiest fight when aged an unbelievable 51. He fought and defeated Tom Shelton, who was half his age. It was an epic battle with Richmond eventually defeating Shelton. Again, according to boxing writers of the day, Richmond took a punishing blow from Shelton in the second round and somehow managed to punch his way through the majority of the remaining 20 rounds, unable to see out of his left eye. After this victory, his place among British boxing elites now finally established, Richmond began to showcase his skills to European royalty, and in 1821, he acted as an usher at the coronation for King George IV. It cannot be stressed enough that Richmond achieved all this during a time when slavery was a very legal and very widespread practice. Bill Richmond died at his home in London in 1829 after having lived a remarkable life and was inducted into the International Boxing Hall of Fame in 1999. There is a common misconception about Europe and black people, that basically there are no black people there other than maybe in London. As a first-generation West Indian born in London myself, I too fall victim to this strange phenomenon. Occasionally, a reader from Russia, or as happened this week, from Estonia, will contact me and I'll think to myself, how on earth did black people get there? Yeah, I know it's dumb. But if you catch me on a wet, miserable Monday morning, I'm liable to think anything. So, more to remind me than to educate anyone else that we are a global people. This particular slice of history is from Poland via Germany and takes us right the way around Europe. Let me introduce you to Miss Lala, also known as Olga Kyra, the Venus of the Tropics, the Cannon Woman, and the African Princess. This is King Carouse, the Black History Buff, and welcome to the Black History Buff podcast. Each episode will be going through another chapter from Black History and showcasing one of the amazing characters from Black History. You can find us on Instagram at Black History Buff 777 and at BHB Media 777, also on Instagram. So please kick back, relax, and enjoy today's show. Miss Lala was born Anna Olga Albertina Brown to Wilhelm Brown and Marie Christine, forgive my pronunciation, Bostad, on April 21st, 1858 in the former German but now Polish city of Stettin. She first appeared in the circus aged 9 and found fame aged 21 in France. She toured around Europe, eventually finding her way to London, where she performed at the Royal Aquarium and Manchester's Gaiety Theatre. Lala was part of the troupe called Folies Bergère and the Keziah Sisters. She partnered with another strength acrobat called Philophia Sturzica, Kyra Leblanche. Together, they were known as Les Deux Papillons, the two butterflies. The circus, as was done at that time, played up Lala's African ancestry to create mystery and thereby increase ticket sales. Stories were circulated saying that she was a dethroned African princess who lost her throne and was sold into slavery. These kind of backstories were often created for circus acts, and similar backstories for circus performers in America, such as Zubaila, the Circassian lady, are well documented. I touch on the topic briefly in my episode about Russian poet Alexander Pushkin, who died 30 years before Miss Lala's first performance. Lala's Iron Jaw act was hailed in Paris as being superior to the male Iron Jaw performers, a compliment which must have stuck in many a man's throat. I'm so cheesy. In an 1879 newspaper report, Lala's act is described in detail. The article mentions how Lala hung from her knees on a trapeze. Okay, get ready for this. While holding a second trapeze in her mouth. A child, a woman, and a man then took it in turn to perform poses on the second trapeze, and then a duo act took their turn, all the while with Lala bearing their weight between her teeth. Let me just go back over that. A child, a woman, a man, and then two other full-grown human beings all hung from this trapeze whilst Lala held it in her teeth. Wow. To top it off, then a woman performed a toe hang off this second trapeze whilst holding the weight of another woman in her arms. Then the ante was upped even further as Lala was lifted up to the roof rafters where she hung upside down on her trapeze using just one leg, whilst holding the weight of a man on each arm and the weight of one between her teeth. I've got to be honest, I would be absolutely terrified watching this, and it makes me want to go to the circus. The Cirque du Soleil needs to be able to top that. If I'm not seeing you hold a whole family in your teeth while being lifted up to the rafters, I don't want to see your show. But it's not over. The grand finale of her act was Miss Lala lifted a Civil War era cannon with wheels up into the air with her teeth. The cannon was then fired with the aftershock of the blast, causing Lala's body to just bounce around involuntarily. I'm sorry, that's just incredible. One reviewer said, "She does all that her muscular rivals have done and a great deal more. Lala, as we have hinted, is a representative of a dark-skinned race, but in the manner of strength, she is prepared to assert her superiority of the boastful people who will have it that all virtues are associated with a light complexion." I mean, okay, it's a backhanded compliment, but this was roughly the late 1800s. And for a writer to actually pretty much say that she's proving that she can do it better than all the white people, I think that's a pretty big thing. Miss Lala really represented what we would call today black girl magic to the absolute fullest. Hey guys, I hope you're doing well and have been enjoying the content. Look, I'm going to be blunt. I really want to do this podcasting, content creation thing full time, but I can't do this without your support. And yeah, I mean financial support. So, for the price of a medium-sized coffee, nah. For the price of a Jamaican patty, you can help to support the podcast, IG page, Facebook page, blog, YouTube account, and now my website by either joining my Patreon or making a one-off donation to my PayPal account. And if that's not your thing, then you could even hop over to blackhistorybuff.com and check out the merch on there. I've got hoodies, jumpers, t-shirts, all themed around Black history, so not only can you listen to your history, you can rep it in your clothing as well. So, for the price of a small oxtail and rice, you can help to bring more hidden tales from Black history into the limelight. Lala was immortalised at the age of 21 when she was painted by Edgar Degas at the Cirque Fernando, which was close to his studio. The painting shows Lala suspended from the roof of the circus by a rope connected to a bit between her teeth. If you actually go onto my website and you find the corresponding blog post that goes along with this episode, you'll see the actual painting itself and the sketch that Degas did to prepare to do the full painting, and there's a really cool effect on there. So if you get a chance, just hop over to www.blackhistorybuff.com and you'll actually see a split screen of the painting there on the website. So back to the show. Degas, who himself was mixed race on his mother's side, watched Lala's popular act for 4 nights, but was challenged by the perspective that he was faced with. You know, he's trying to paint from underneath the subject, and also trying to stick to the style of like the 1870s theory of color choices. And he was also challenged by trying to paint a pose that would kind of capture the movement and motion of what she was actually doing. And one of the critics at the time wrote that it was considered to be among the artist's most striking and complex achievements. And like I said, if you go to the website and you have a look, you'll see it's absolutely stunning piece of work. You should definitely check that out. Lala continued to perform from the 1860s up to the late 1880s. In 1888, she married an American contortionist by the name of Emmanuel Woodson. This was the same year her stage partner, Philophia, tragically died from a fall. Emmanuel and Lala went on to have a daughter, Rose Eddy Woodson, who was born in London, 1894. According to the newspaper, The New York Age, the couple went on to have 2 more daughters who formed an act called the Three Khazars. In the last years of his life, Lala's husband Emmanuel was the stage manager of a circus in Brussels. The last known date of Lala's life, when she was known as Anna Woodson and Olga Woodson, is in 1919 from a US passport application. So that episode was about Miss Lala, the iron-jawed acrobat. And our story actually ends. The last recorded information about Miss Lala is from 1919, which, if you're interested, ties in quite nicely with the first podcast episode I ever did on the Harlem Hellfighters, which is episode number 1 of the Black History Buff podcast. And it also ties in with some future episodes that will be coming on Black Germans and Black Germany. So please, keep listening to the show, share with your friends, leave a rating on Apple, and check out the website. I've forgotten. I have actually added a map to my website for sales. It's a really nice looking scratch off map, and I thought for those of you who've been listening to the show who are into these kind of things, you might quite like to get a little scratch off map, and maybe together we can mark off the areas and the countries that I'm going through on the map as I go through episode by episode. So if you're interested, you can actually head over to my website, which is blackhistorybuff.com, and if you put in the discount code BLACK, so that's capital B, capital L, capital A, capital C, capital K, 777, you'll actually get a 50% discount of the map. Just a little something that I've managed to source and put on there, and I thought it might be a bit of fun. So I hope you've enjoyed the episode, and I'll be speaking to you all soon. Take care.
honeysuckle, a great big expression of happiness. So in this recording, I just take a moment to go into a little bit about why I started this whole project, why I do what I do, and some of the people who have helped to carry me along the way in how I got here. It's a short, sweet episode, and I start off by saying some thank yous to some very important people. So please kick back, relax, enjoy the show, and thank you for listening. I'll see you on the other side. This is King Caruso, Black History Buff, and I just want to take this opportunity to thank everybody who's listening to my voice right now. In particular, I want to thank the people who have contributed to my Patreon. I'm going to name them by name. So that is Miriam, Georgia, Chloe, Kimberly. Thank you so much, Kimberly. Jane, Stephanie Doyle, Cleo Brown, Angelina, Univ Hair Sole, Alicia Anderson, Ashley Aaron, Kristen Bueno, Taisha Lewis, Jackie Matthews, James Cleveland, Christopher Anton, thank you so much, brother. Emily Osborne and Dwayne McTavius, who I think has possibly one of the greatest names I've ever heard in my life. Thank you, DM. I just want to thank these guys because without their contribution each month, it would be really difficult, now and impossible for me to maintain social media accounts, maintain the podcast, to maintain my website, to purchase resources, to get rights to pictures, to do half of what I do. And I appreciate them so much. And I appreciate you guys who are listening to me right now. It's your energy, it's your feedback, it's your contribution that really pushes me to keep doing what I'm doing and to try and move forward and to try and improve. And I want to take this opportunity to kind of explain why I'm doing this to people who don't know. So I haven't started the social media accounts or this podcast because I'm some kind of activist. I've started this because I'm a father. And I think like most people who strive to do anything that's out of their comfort zone, I'm doing it out of love. And in this particular instance, it's for the love of my son. When my son was 3 years of age, one day he just woke up and ping, he was color aware. It was literally like he just downloaded some new information and just woke up one morning and my beautiful little boy was like, "Hey, I'm black. What does that mean, Dad?" And I had to find some answers for him. And straight away, in an instant, my mind went to, how do I teach a 3-year-old about slavery? How do I teach them about oppression? How do I teach them about the struggle? And the next thought right after that was disgust and shame in myself, in wondering why that was my first instinct. It kind of, and I have to be honest about it, it kind of shows how much the oppression and self-hate can get into you and how it can, and how easily it can be passed on to another generation if you don't check yourself. So I did check myself, fortunately. And after kind of talking to my son and telling him about melanin and how it works and explaining to him why his hair is curly and how the curls in his hair follow the Fibonacci rule and how his hair grows towards the sun like every living thing in the world. And that was really important. My son has a massive curly afro. And I remember taking him out into the garden and saying to him, "All right, what direction does the grass grow?" And he says, "Up, Dad." And I said, "And what about the trees over there? What direction does that grow?" He says, "Up." And I said, "Son, so what direction do you grow?" He says, "Up." I said, "Now look up. What do you see up there?" And he said, the clouds and the sky. And I said, "And what else?" And he said, "The sun, Dad." I said, "Look, son, everything that lives grows upwards towards the sun. What direction does your hair grow in, son?" And he went, "Up." And I said, "Exactly. Your hair grows up towards the sun because your hair is beautiful." And he smiled, and since that day, he has always claimed his afro. He doesn't want to cut his hair off. He's proud of his afro, and it's a really cool moment for me. But in terms of his history and the rest, once we'd gotten past melanin and gotten past his hair, and explaining to him the wonders of it, and kind of started to fill him up with that positive self-image, I decided to tackle the history portion of it. Now, when I was younger, was fortunate enough to go to a Saturday school. So in London, there was an era where they had lots of Saturday schools, and my Saturday school was in Brixton. And it's only years later, in fact, once I'd started all my social media accounts, that I realized that the Saturday school that I went to was actually set up as a chapter of the British Black Panthers. But that's a story of the whole other day. But at the Saturday school, we learned Black history, and we learned about Marcus Garvey and Bob Marley and great leaders from around the world. And I'd forgotten about it until I started thinking about teaching my son. And I realized that when I was a kid, they never taught me about slavery straight away. I didn't learn that till much later. In fact, I didn't learn that until I was about 15. And but I knew some elements of Black history. And so what I decided to do as a parent was to make the study of Black history and Black culture a priority in the household. I allowed my son to see me reading books, buying books, studying books on Black history. I made it a priority in the house. I bought him a massive book that was way beyond his reading age. I mean, he was only 3 years old, and this book was maybe for 5, 6, maybe even 7-year-olds. And I bought him this huge book of Black history, and I told him, this is your book. It's ready for when you're ready. And I put it down, and I didn't even read it. It just sat there on the shelf, looking at him every day. And the reason I did it this way is because I wanted to make him curious. I wanted him to see that this was important to Dad, that this was important in the house, that this was something of value that he should know about. And it was about a year later when I woke up one morning to find out that my son was already awake, and he was sat in the living room, curled up in the corner with the big book that I'd bought him a year earlier, that was still maybe 2 to 3 years beyond his reading age. And he was reading about Marcus Garvey, and he told me about Marcus Garvey and Nelson Mandela very proudly, because he'd read the information in his Black history book. And it really made me so proud and so happy to see that he had this curiosity, and it was there, like at this age, before the negativity of the world set in, that we were already pumping him up with positive images of himself, positive images of his culture and of his community. And I started the social media pages, and then eventually this podcast, as a way to create resources and to be a resource to do the same for other children and other people out there. I mean, since I started this, I learned so much history, and I approached the whole thing as a student. So I started the Instagram and I started the social media as a way to put out what I was learning, so that if I was wrong, I could be corrected. So I approached everything as a student rather than as a teacher. And I still do. You can still hear it to this day. I am the student, and I will always be a student. I'm a lifelong learner, and we learn from each other. And this community that is starting to form is just around what I'm doing is just a beautiful, loving community who are happy to learn and who are happy to also teach. And I'm receptive to that. And it's just grown, and it's become a wonderful thing. And I just want to take this opportunity just to tell those people who don't know, thank you. To anyone who's hearing my voice right now, I'm taking this time to say thank you. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your energy. Thank you for your feedback. Thank you for the fact checking. Thank you for the Patreon visits. Thank you for those who've contributed on PayPal. Thank you for going to the website, and for all those people who got messages from me asking for feedback on my website. Thank you for being patient with me. Thank you for letting me know when my posts were good and when they sucked. Thank you for the likes. Thank you for the shares. Thank you for the comments. Most of all, thank you for the love. I really feel the love from this Pan-African community that I am surrounded by and that I am talking to, and I'm really feeling the love from the allies, those people who consider themselves to be allies and who act like allies, who really want to see this world be a fairer, more just, more honest and open place, who again have contributed their time and their energy and their likes and their feedback and their goodwill. So this is just me, King Carouse, the Black History Buff, taking an opportunity to say thank you to everybody. My social media pages are now up and established. My website is now up and running, finally, and I'm just going to put that in perspective as well. To think that someone like me, who failed math in school, who failed English in school, who discovered later on in life that he was severely dyslexic and had to go back and achieve those qualifications later on in life, for someone like me to have written all these posts and taught myself how to do video editing and photography and audio editing, to build a website and then fill it full of words that I've written, for me is a massive accomplishment. And I only could have done it with the love of my family, for the love of my family, for the love of my son, for the love of my community, and for the love of everybody that's listening to my voice right now. Like, you guys are just amazing, and I hope my appreciation really comes across. So please keep listening to the show, keep following and sharing on social media, keep DMing me, keep tweeting me, keep hitting me on Facebook, keep emailing me. I do have an email address. It's podcast@blackhistorybuff.com. Please keep coming to the website, which is www.blackhistorybuff.com. Please keep letting me know when I'm getting it right and when I'm doing the right thing, and please keep letting me know when I'm doing it wrong, and please keep sending me information. You guys send the most amazing bits of information and facts and tidbits, and I really want more of that to come. Lastly, please keep listening to the podcast and please keep sharing it. I cannot believe that the podcast has now hit 12,000 listens as it stands at this point. 12,000 listens as it stands at this point. Just wow. And I think it has the potential to have even more, but I can't do anything without you guys, and I haven't done anything without you guys, so we move forward as a team. So this, whilst it's called the Black History Buff podcast, this is your podcast. So again, this is King Carouse. I'm getting a bit emotional here. This is King Carouse, the Black History Buff. Just saying thank you, I love you, I appreciate you all. Keep listening. I'm gonna keep reaching out, and you guys just keep reaching back. God bless.
This is King Caruso, the Black History Buff, and I'm bringing you a different segment today. As I go through my own learning journey studying Black history, I often come across these amazing proverbs and fables. And rather than let them go to waste, I've decided to pick a few out, make a few amendments of my own, and put them out as audio recordings for you guys. So kick back, relax, and enjoy Black History Buff, proverbs, myths, and legends. The man who never lied. Once upon a time, there lived a wise man by the name of Mamad, and Mamad never lied. Which, if we're honest, must have been really annoying. I mean, think about it. An insecure friend asks for shopping advice. Hey Mamad, do I look fat in this? Mamad, yes. Your fat makes you look fat, so you look fat in everything. A father showing Mamad his newborn son. Hey Mamad, isn't my boy adorable? Mamad, no, he takes after you. I mean, you get the point. He never lied. And all the people in the land, even the ones 20 miles away, knew about him. I'm guessing that you'd kind of make it your business to know about this guy, right? And steer well clear. Anyway, there was a king in this land. The king had heard about Mamad, probably from some ugly friend who Mamad had offended with his brutal honesty, and decided that he'd bring this Mamad down a peg or two. I mean, he was the king after all, and he couldn't have this Mamad going around upsetting everybody with the truth. So he ordered a couple of his subjects to find him and bring him to the palace. Mamad stood in the presence of the king. The king was dressed in his royal blue and yellow robes and sat forebodingly on his throne. Pulling himself up to his full height and using his most regal voice, the king spoke. Mamad, is it true that you have never lied? It's true, replied Mamad. And will you never lie in your life? Asked the king. Yes, I am sure about that, Mamad dryly responded. Okay, tell the truth, but be careful. The lie is cunning, and it gets on your tongue easily. And with that, the king dismissed Mamad from the royal court. Thought Mamad. That was weird. And made his way home. Several days passed, and the king summoned Mamad once again. This time, there was a big crowd. The king was about to go hunting. The king held his horse by the mane. His left foot was already on the stirrup. He beckoned Mamad over and spoke. Go to my summer palace and tell the queen I will be with her for lunch. Tell her to prepare a big feast. You will have lunch with me then. Yes, your highness, Mamad replied. He bowed and then turned to go see the queen. The king waited until Mamad was out of sight, laughed, and said to the other men who made up the hunting party, We won't go hunting, and now Mamad will have lied to the queen, and tomorrow we will all have a good laugh at his expense. The other men who made up the hunting party exchanged awkward glances with each other and forced themselves to laugh along with the king. Mamad arrived at the palace and met the queen in the royal chambers. The way the king had looked at him made him feel uneasy. He sensed a trick. If he gave the king's orders, he might be trapped in a lie. But if he didn't, and the king kept his word, then he would also be trapped in a lie. Why did telling the truth have to be so hard, he thought, when the queen interrupted his thoughts. Mamad, what message do you have for me from the king? Mamad wrung his hands and sheepishly replied, maybe you should prepare a feast for lunch tomorrow, and maybe you shouldn't. Maybe the king will come by noon, And maybe he won't. What kind of message is that? Said the Queen. Tell me, will he come or won't he? The Queen demanded. I don't know whether he put his right foot on the stirrup or if he put his left foot on the ground after I left, said Mamat, squirming awkwardly. The Queen looked sternly at Mamat. You're the man who always tells the truth, right? Yes, replied Mamat. She paused, then said, Does this dress make me look fat? Ugh, never mind. Okay, I see what's going on. Look, thank you for the message. Now go. The next day, the king arrived at the palace. He smelled of wine and mischief. Slurring his words and laughing, he said, The wise Mamat, who never lies, lied to you yesterday, and let out a huge laugh. But the Queen told him about the words of Mamat, and the king realized that the wise man never lies and only says that which he sees with his own eyes. He also learned that wives can always smell a husband's lies.
Today's episode features a scathing response to possibly the most ill-advised take me back letter ever, and some wisdom from an ancient African proverb. This is King Carouse, the Black History Buff, and welcome to the Black History Buff podcast. Each episode will be going through another chapter from Black History and showcasing one of the amazing characters from Black History. You can find us on Instagram at Black History Buff 777 and at BHB Media 777, also on Instagram. So please kick back, relax, and enjoy today's show. Every so often, when I'm browsing the internet, I'll come across something that for some reason stops me dead in my tracks. Recently, it was an image. The picture was of a sober-looking, dark-skinned, middle-aged black man, sporting a very full and very fine beard. He had the kind of look on his face that your grandfather gives you right before asking you to pick your own punishment or to go get the belt. Children of all colours and cultures call it the look, and it means that patience is wearing thin. The stern face in the picture belonged to a formerly enslaved man named Jordan Anderson, who lived during the 19th century. Very little is known about his life other than that he was taken from his parents as a boy and sold into a life of slavery. We know that he was born sometime around December 1825 and somewhere in Tennessee, and that he was sold to a General Paulding Anderson, who then gifted, and I say that through gritted teeth, Jordan to his son Patrick Henry Anderson, who went by his middle name Henry. We know that he married Amanda McGregor in 1848, and that the couple may have eventually had around 11 children. And we know that in 1864, when Union troops camped out on the plantation where Anderson had been forced to labour for his entire life, that he, his family, and possibly 32 other enslaved people were all freed due to President Lincoln's 1863 Emancipation Proclamation. This mass exodus broke the back of the plantation and ruined the finances of Patrick Henry Anderson, Jordan's former owner. Now look, let's be honest. Most of you listening to this episode will have at some point in time wanted somebody back in your life that you've driven away. Possibly an ex, maybe a good friend that you've upset, or a family member you've fallen out with. Most of us have sat there in our still, quiet moments and thought, damn, I kinda messed that up. I wonder if I can make things right. These moments of reflection are usually followed by a few hours of sad, lonely cyberstalking that goes on till the majority of us sober up, eat some junk food, maybe listen to some Drake, and then just push those feelings way down deep inside. Because in our heart of hearts, we know we'd probably do the exact same thing we did before all over again. But there is a type, a truly unique type of person who sees the object of their desire living their best life without them and decides, nah, I'm going in anyway. Most of us don't do that. But the temptation is real and almost understandable when it's an ex-partner or friend we're talking about. But it takes a special kind of douchebag to try and convince a former slave to come back to you. Well, Patrick Henry Anderson was one such douchebag, and that's exactly what he tried to do. Mortgaged up to the hilt, plantation on the brink of ruin, Patrick Henry Anderson decided he would try to win back the affections of his ex-slave, by writing him a letter. In my head, I have the image of this scrawny, scraggly-headed man writing this letter, perhaps shedding a few fragile, white-hot tears of entitlement while he wrestled with pen and page, battling to find the right words. The words that would bring back his fortune. The words that would make everything better. After leaving the plantation, Brother Jordan worked briefly in a Nashville field hospital. Then in 1865 moved to Dayton, Ohio and secured work with the support of abolitionist Valentine Winters. For the most part, his life was uneventful. He worked, got paid, supported his family and raised his children, living the quiet life of dignity that had so long been denied him. Brother Jordan was finally living his best life. This quiet life of domestic bliss was briefly shattered when, as so often happens when things are going well, he received an unwanted message from his ex-owner, that is. As a former slave, Brother Jordan could not read, and so he took the letter to Valentine Winters and asked him to read it for him. I can only imagine the words Jordan heard read aloud that day. I say that because no copy of the letter sent by Patrick Henry Anderson exists. More than likely, it was instantly burned. But we can get some clues about what was written from Brother Jordan's response. A response that he made public by doing the 1900s equivalent of taking it to the gram and having it published in the local newspaper. A response that has gone down in history as one of the best clapbacks of all time. Up next, Brother Jordan's response after this quick message.